It was 1994. A 29-year-old man woke up in the middle of the night, and he could not take it anymore. Not the noise outside, not a nightmare, himself. He later described it like this. He had been living with an invisible roommate who never shut up. A voice inside his head that told him every day that he wasn't enough, that life was unbearable, that there was no point. And on this particular night, he had one thought that cut through all the noise. I cannot live with myself any longer. And then, and this is the part that changed everything, he stopped, and he noticed something strange in that sentence. I cannot live with myself. If I cannot live with myself, that means there are two of me, the I and the myself. Which one is real? That question cracked something open in him. He spent the next 5 hours in a state of complete, overwhelming peace. By morning, the depression that had tortured him for decades was simply gone. He went from wanting to die to feeling more alive than he ever had. His name is Eckhart Tolle, and the book he wrote about what he discovered that night has sold over 3 million copies and is one of the most transformative things I have ever read. Today, we're going deep on the power of now, and I mean actually deep, not the surface level, live in the present moment stuff you've already heard. I want to show you the actual mechanics of why your mind makes you miserable and exactly what to do about it. We've got 4 lessons, and I promise, by the time we get to lesson 3, you're going to think about your own brain completely differently. Let's go.
Before we get into the lessons, I need to spend a few minutes on Eckhart Tolle as a person, because it makes everything in this book hit completely differently once you know where it came from. Tolle grew up in post-war Germany in a pretty rough household. He eventually got into Cambridge University, which sounds great on paper, but internally he was in a constant state of dread and self-loathing. Smart guy, prestigious school, and completely miserable. That's actually really important, because this book isn't for people who have hard lives. It's for people who have objectively fine lives and still can't stop suffering. That's most of us, by the way. His depression escalated through his 20s until that night in 1994. What he described in those hours after his realization, this sense of deep stillness, of being completely at home in himself for the first time, he eventually figured out was what spiritual traditions have been pointing at for thousands of years. Buddhism calls it enlightenment. Christianity calls it the peace that surpasses understanding. Tolle just calls it being. And what's wild is he spent the next 2 years essentially sitting on park benches in London, doing nothing, just existing, completely content. People who knew him thought he had lost his mind, but he was actually, for the first time, finding it. Then he started talking to people, small groups, then larger ones. He eventually wrote all of this down, and Oprah picked it up. And suddenly, this guy who used to sleep on park benches became one of the most widely read spiritual teachers alive. I'm not telling you this to sell you on Tolle as a guru. I'm telling you because his entire philosophy comes from a real experience of breaking out of mental suffering, not a theory read in a library. The man was in the mud, and he found a way out. That's what we're unpacking today. Lesson 1. You are not your mind.
All right, lesson 1, and this is the one where people either go, okay, sure, whatever, and miss the whole book, or they actually sit with it, and it genuinely changes how they move through every single day of their life. The lesson is this: you are not your mind. Now, I know that sounds like a bumper sticker, but let me show you what it actually means. Right now, and I mean literally right now, as you're listening to me, there is a voice in your head. It might be commenting on what I'm saying. It might be thinking about what you need to do later. It might be judging your day, worrying about something, replaying a conversation from 3 days ago. That voice has been running basically nonstop since you were a child. It has opinions about everything. It catastrophizes. It compares you to other people. It wakes you up at 2 a.m. to remind you of something embarrassing you said in 2016. It does not take days off. It does not shut up. And here's what Tolle says is the core mistake every human being makes. We think we are that voice. We think the internal monologue is us. We identify with it completely. So when it says, I'm worthless, we believe it. When it says, everything is going to fall apart, we panic. When it says, that person doesn't like you, we spiral. But here's Tolle's insight, and this is the thing that cracked him open at 2 a.m. If you can observe the voice, you can't be the voice. Think about that. If there's a voice, and there's something listening to the voice, those are two different things. The voice is the mind. The listener is something else, something deeper. Tolle calls it awareness or presence or being, but forget the labels for a second. Just notice that when you observe a thought, there's a gap, a split second of silence between you and the thought. That gap is the most important real estate in your entire mental life. Here's the real-world version of this. Tolle makes a point that actually really landed for me. He says, if you walk down the street and saw someone talking out loud to themselves nonstop, muttering, arguing with themselves, narrating everything, you think, okay, that person needs some help, right? But you do the exact same thing, just quietly. The only difference is the volume. What he's saying is, the normal inner monologue that we all have, the constant commentary on life, is not actually that different from what we'd consider pathological behavior. We've just normalized it because everyone does it. And here's the practical piece, because I know some of you are thinking, okay, interesting philosophy, but what do I actually do with this? Tolle calls it watching the thinker. It's simple, almost stupidly simple. You just notice when the voice is talking. You don't try to stop it. You don't judge what it's saying. You don't fight it. You just observe it like you're watching a stream. There's a thought. There's another one. Interesting. The moment you do that, something shifts because you've stopped being the thought and you've become the one watching it. And from that position, the thought has no power over you. It's just a thing passing through. Tolle says that if you sustain this even for a few seconds, you'll feel a sense of stillness and peace underneath the noise. Not because the thoughts have stopped, they haven't, but because you're no longer being swept along by them. Try it right now. What is the voice in your head saying? Just notice. Don't fight it. Just watch. That's it. That's the practice. And it sounds tiny, but people who do this consistently say it fundamentally changes their relationship with their own mind. The reason this matters so much is because everything else in this book builds on this one foundation. If you get this, really get it, lessons 2, 3, and 4 all click into place. If you don't, they sound like nice ideas that don't quite work. So, you are not the voice. You are the one listening to it. Now, here's where it gets weirder. Because even if you get that intellectually, there's another layer of your psychology working against you. And this is the one I was genuinely not expecting. Let's talk about it.
Lesson 2. The pain body.
Okay, so imagine your psychology has a parasite living in it. I know that sounds dramatic, but stay with me, because this is the most accurate description I have ever encountered for something I think almost everyone has experienced without knowing what to call it. Tolle introduces this concept called the pain body, and here's the theory. Every time you experience emotional pain in your life, every disappointment, every humiliation, every heartbreak, every moment of fear or shame or grief, it doesn't fully dissolve. A residue of that pain stays behind. It gets stored in your body and your subconscious, and over months and years, that accumulated residue forms its own entity. It has its own needs, its own agenda. That entity is the pain body. Now, this sounds metaphorical. Tolle is using it metaphorically in some ways, but what he's describing maps almost perfectly onto what psychology calls emotional triggers, trauma responses, and limbic hijacking. This isn't woo, this is real. Here's the thing that makes the pain body so dangerous. It can only survive by feeding on more pain. Happiness is genuinely indigestible to it. When you're at peace, the pain body is dormant, but it's still there, and it is patient. And when the right trigger comes along, it wakes up. And when it wakes up, it doesn't announce itself. It just becomes you. And this is the part where I need you to think about your own life honestly. Have you ever been in a perfectly fine day, genuinely good mood, things going okay, and then someone says something slightly off-tone to you? Maybe a comment that wasn't meant as a dig, but landed like one. And suddenly you're in your head, and then you say something back that's a little sharp, and now there's tension. And before you know it, you've had a massive argument, or you've withdrawn into a dark mood, and you're not even entirely sure how you got there. That's the pain body. It found an opening, and it walked right through.
Or here's another one. Have you ever noticed how the most passionate romantic relationships can flip like a switch? One minute it's intense and connected, and the next minute you're saying things to each other that you'd never say to an enemy. Not because you've stopped loving the person, but because something got activated in one or both of you that just took over. The pain body doesn't care about your relationship. It doesn't care about your mood, your day, your goals. It is driven entirely by the need to experience more pain, and it will manufacture drama, provoke fights, and catastrophize situations just to feed. Here's the really uncomfortable part. Tolle says the pain body doesn't just use emotional situations as food. It can co-opt your thinking. When the pain body is active, your thoughts will become negative, pessimistic, sometimes dark. And because of lesson 1, because most people are identified with their thoughts, they assume these thoughts are true. They believe the pain body's version of reality. So what do? The answer is the same as lesson 1, but applied to emotion instead of thought. Tolle calls it presence. The moment you feel the pain body activating, the irritation, the heaviness, the sudden dark mood, the irrational anger, you catch it, and you name it. Internally you go, this is the pain body. This is old pain being activated. This is not reality. You don't fight it. You don't try to argue yourself out of the feeling. You just shine your conscious attention on it. You feel it in your body. Where does it sit? Chest, stomach, throat? And you observe it with your full presence. Tolle says the pain body cannot survive that. It feeds on unconscious reaction. The moment you become a conscious observer of it, you cut off its food supply. It might linger. It might try to pull you back in, but it cannot survive the light of your awareness. This is incredibly practical, by the way, because we've all been in situations where we reacted in a way we later regretted, said something cruel, withdrew, lashed out, and we didn't understand why. The pain body explains it, and more importantly, the presence practice gives you an actual way out in real time. There's a reason Tolle devotes so much space to this concept, because even if you intellectually accept lesson 1, even if you know you're not your thoughts, the pain body will still try to pull you back into unconscious suffering. You can't just think your way past it. You have to feel it with awareness. Now, we've talked about your relationship with your mind and your relationship with your stored emotions. The next lesson goes somewhere that might initially sound more abstract, but I want you to hold on because it's actually the most practical thing in the entire book. It's about your relationship with time. Lesson 3, time is not what you think it is.
I want to ask you a question. What percentage of your waking life are you actually here, in the actual physical present moment? Not thinking about the past, not planning or worrying about the future, just here. For most people, if they're honest, the answer is somewhere between 5 and 15%, maybe less. The rest of the time, we're living inside our heads, replaying things, rehearsing things, imagining futures that may never arrive, mulling over conversations that happened last Tuesday. The body is here in the present. The mind is somewhere else entirely. And Tolle's argument is that this, not your circumstances, not your job, not your relationships, this is the source of most human suffering. He introduces this distinction between what he calls clock time and psychological time. Clock time is useful and real. You need it. You use it to schedule things, to plan, to learn from mistakes, to work toward goals. There's nothing wrong with clock time. Psychological time is different. Psychological time is when your mind lives in the past or the future. When it doesn't just visit the past to learn something useful, it camps out there, turns it into a dwelling place.
Or when it doesn't just look ahead to prepare, it obsessively projects every possible scenario, most of them terrible, into a future that does not yet exist. And here's the thing that makes this insidious. The mind genuinely believes this is useful. It tells you that replaying the painful conversation is processing it. It tells you that imagining worst-case scenarios is being prepared. But mostly, and I think if you're honest, you'll recognize this, it's just suffering. Prolonged, unnecessary suffering about things that are not happening right now. Tolle makes this point that I think is genuinely one of the most clarifying ideas I've ever encountered. Nothing has ever happened in the future. Nothing has ever happened in the past. Everything that has ever happened, every experience, every moment, every joy and tragedy, happened in the present moment. The past is a memory of a present moment that existed. The future is an imagined present moment that hasn't happened yet. The only place anything ever actually happens is now. And we spend most of our lives anywhere but here. Let me make this concrete. Tolle talks about what he calls the psychology of waiting. Think about how you feel when you're stuck in traffic, or in a long queue, or waiting for an important email that hasn't come yet. There's this inner friction, right? This sense of resistance to the current moment. I don't want to be here. I want to be somewhere else. This is wasted time. He calls that small-scale waiting. But then there's large-scale waiting, which is more insidious because it goes on for years. Waiting until you get the promotion, waiting until you find the relationship, waiting until you lose the weight, move to the new city, finish the degree. Then life will begin. Then you'll be okay. But here's what actually happens. You get the promotion, you get the relationship, you lose the weight, and for maybe 3 weeks you feel great. And then the mind finds a new problem, a new thing to wait for, a new way to be not quite okay yet. Because the mind is a machine for creating the next thing to want. That's its default setting. And if you don't understand that, you'll spend your whole life chasing the next marker and always feel like you're slightly behind where you should be. The alternative isn't apathy. It isn't giving up on goals. Tolle is very clear about this. He is not saying don't have ambitions, don't plan, don't work toward things. What he's saying is do all of that from a foundation of being present. Take action in the world, but stop treating the present moment as an obstacle to get through on your way to your future happiness. The practical move is this. When you catch yourself living in psychological time, dwelling, projecting, obsessing, you bring yourself back, not with force, just with a gentle noticing. Feel something physical, the air on your skin, the weight of your body in the chair, the sound in the room. You use your senses to come back to the only moment that is actually real. And then you'll notice, in this moment, right now, there's usually not actually a problem, not a real, immediate, this second problem. There might be situations, things to deal with, but the catastrophe is almost always in the projection, not in the present. Speaking of which, that's actually what our final lesson is about, because everything we've covered so far, the mind, the pain body, time, they all converge in one core question. What do you do when life hands you something genuinely hard?
Lesson 4. Surrender.
All right, final lesson, and this is the one that sounds the weakest on the surface, but I'd argue is actually the most powerful. Tolle talks about surrender, and I already know what half of you are thinking. Surrender? That sounds like giving up. That sounds like telling people to just accept bad things and do nothing about them. I get it. It's a word with a lot of baggage, but Tolle means something very specific by it. And once you get what he actually means, you'll recognize it as something you've probably experienced in small doses. Those moments where you suddenly felt completely okay, even in the middle of a difficult situation. Here's his definition. Surrender is the complete, unconditional acceptance of the present moment as it is, without the inner emotional and mental resistance that says, this shouldn't be happening. That's it. That's the whole thing. He is not saying don't take action. He is not saying lie down and let life do whatever it wants to you. He's saying drop the resistance to what is currently true, because that resistance, that internal war with reality, is the thing that is actually hurting you, not the situation itself. Let me give you his example, which I think is perfect. Imagine you're walking through a park and you step into a deep patch of mud, and you're stuck. You're properly stuck. Resignation, which is not surrender, would be, okay, fine, I live in the mud now, this is my life, I'm a mud person. That's hopelessness, that's giving up. But here's what most people actually do, which Tolle says is also wrong. They stand there furious, internally screaming at the mud, mentally arguing with the fact that the mud exists, that they stepped in it, that this is unfair, that their shoes are ruined, that this is the kind of thing that always happens to them. They're fighting the mud with their mind. And while they're doing that, they're still stuck in the mud. Surrender is a third option. Surrender is, okay, I'm in the mud. That is the current reality. I accept that fully without any drama about it. And from that place of acceptance, you calmly figure out how to get out. You take action, effective action, action that isn't distorted by panic or rage. Tolle's claim, and I think this is borne out both by the book and by honestly observing your own life, is that action taken from a place of inner acceptance is almost always more effective than action driven by resistance and frustration. Because when you're in a state of resistance, you're spending half your mental and emotional energy fighting the reality of what's happening instead of dealing with what's actually there. You felt this. Think about a time you dealt with something difficult and you handled it with unexpected calm. Maybe a crisis at work or a moment where something went wrong and you just went into clear-headed problem-solving mode, versus a time where something went wrong and you spiraled and you made it worse or said things you regretted. The difference wasn't the situation. The difference was whether you were in a state of acceptance or resistance. So how do you practice this? Tolle's technique in this section is what he calls inhabiting the inner body. When you feel yourself being swept up by anger, by anxiety, by the urge to resist what's happening, you deliberately bring your attention into your physical body, not your thoughts, your body. You feel your hands, literally. Feel the life energy in your hands right now. Feel the weight of your feet. Breathe into your belly. This sounds almost too simple to work, but it's genuinely one of the fastest ways to interrupt the mind's drama. Because when your attention is anchored in the physical present, the mind has less purchase. It becomes harder for the spiral to pull you away. It's like dropping an anchor. The waves are still there, the storm might still be happening outside, but you've got something holding you in place. And from that anchored place, you can take whatever action needs to be taken, clearly, effectively, without adding unnecessary suffering to an already difficult situation.
Okay, let's go all the way back to the beginning. Remember Eckhart Tolle at 2 a.m. in 1994? Couldn't live with himself, on the edge of something very dark. He had a thought, I cannot live with myself. And he noticed, if there's a myself I can't live with, there must be two of me. That moment, that tiny gap in his thinking, that split second of observing himself rather than being himself, was exactly lesson 1. The watcher appeared. And in that moment, the identified mind that had been torturing him for decades lost its grip. And then here's what he figured out in the hours that followed, which is the whole book in one sentence. All your problems require time to exist. Take away the past and the future, and almost nothing you call a problem remains. Try it right now. Right now, in this exact second. Are you okay? Not in 5 minutes, not tomorrow. Right now. Is there an actual emergency happening in this room, in this moment? For almost everyone, almost always, the answer is yes. Right now, I'm fine. The suffering is almost always in the projection, the replay, the story the mind tells about what happened and what might happen. In the actual present moment, there are usually just situations, things to deal with, things to accept, not problems, not catastrophes, just what's here. And when you learn to watch your thoughts instead of becoming them, when you learn to catch the pain body before it takes over, when you stop living in psychological time and come back to now, what Tolle says you find underneath all of it is something that was always there. A stillness, a sense of being okay that doesn't depend on anything outside you, a kind of aliveness that doesn't need anything to be different. That's the box, fully stuffed, always was.
I'll leave you with this. You don't have to believe any of this. You don't have to agree with Tolle's framing or the spiritual language he uses. But there's one thing I'd ask you to try before you decide this is just philosophy. Next time you're anxious, sitting in traffic, lying awake at night, dreading something, stop. Feel your hands. Feel your feet on the floor. Take one breath and ask yourself, right now, in this exact second, am I okay? And then just notice what happens. Come back and tell me in the comments. I'm genuinely curious whether it works for you the same way it worked for me. And if this hit differently than your usual book summary, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and suggest the next book we need to cover. I'll see you on the next one. Bye.